Hey beautiful watchers, I'm the Dom and I'm trying something a little different this month. The November Nanos. Instead of 2 full-length Lost in Adaptations, I'm going to see how many mini episodes I can squeeze in. So what was up first again? Oh yeah. Don't judge me, people. Everyone has their guilty pleasures and this one's mine. I'm 100% aware of its many flaws, including the overabundance of computer-generated imagery and inconsistent plot, but I loved it anyways for how wonderfully silly it was, yet how amusingly seriously it took itself in places. And I think we should all be impressed by how surprisingly well researched it was when it came to small, historically accurate details dotted around the fiction. The book was a little trickier to process. I swear a few times while reading it I was marvelling at how well they'd recreated the original atmosphere in the film, but then less than a page later I'd be this close to sticking an in-name only clause on it. The book's author, Seth Grahame-Smith, has made somewhat of a name for himself by rewriting either famous literature works or history itself to include supernatural horror monsters. Believe it or not, at this point they've become so popular they've inspired a range of impersonators. It would be completely understandable to assume that the only parts of his books that's worth reading is the title and dismiss them entirely, but I gotta say, while I haven't read any of his other works yet, based on my experiences with Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, the dude's actually got some game when it comes to writing a novel. Much like with the film, where if you were able to get past the absurdity of the concept, it was a halfway decent action flick. If you can get past the absurdity of the concept of the book, it's a halfway decent fictional biography. Is Grahame-Smith good enough to get by without his gimmick? Maybe, maybe not, but we're here to talk about the adaptation today, so... As you would obviously have to expect from the title, both the book and the film are about the revelation that, in addition to becoming the 16th President of the United States, fighting the Civil War, freeing the slaves, and rocking a badass hat, Abraham Lincoln was also involved in fighting a secret underground war with an undead army of bloodsuckers. That Lincoln's mother is killed by a vampire over a stupid financial dispute, sparking off his lifelong vendetta against their kind, is accurate, as was a grumpy but good-hearted vampire called Henry taking him under his wing and making him a far more effective vampire killer. Lincoln's friend Speed is pretty accurate to his book counterpart, aside from being slightly less annoying. He's one of the few characters who spout original book dialogue. Vampires could move about in the day quite happily in the book, just like in the film, and as I mentioned in Dracula, that's actually more true to the original vampire mythos than you might have expected. Lincoln did indeed use an axe as his primary weapon in the book. He started out driving stakes through their hearts, but later realised that stabbing them with anything pointy or dismembering them worked just as well. That vampires avenged themselves on Lincoln by murdering his son is accurate, as was the devastating effect it had on the poor child's loving parents. Lincoln's awkwardness around people in general, but his incredible talent at making speeches is in the film, the book, and I'm given to understand real life as well. Basically, what they did in the film isn't bad at all. Adaptation-wise, it went a bit screwy towards the end, but other than that, I'd have to say I've seen much worse. The main issue is the film only covers a fraction of the book. This is almost certainly because the book covers Lincoln's entire freaking life from birth to death in its entirety. While there are still some time jumps, they're a lot shorter and less numerous. The film pretty much just picked out the most plot-advancing parts and ran with it. I can't say I blame them, to be honest. What's interesting about the book was that it could actually go for quite some time without even mentioning vampires and just describe different parts of Lincoln's life and struggles to make a name for himself in a difficult world. Now I know that sounds like it could potentially be very, very boring, especially if you went in expecting non-stop vampire battles, but if you're patient with it, it does actually help add to the impression that you're reading about a normal person in an abnormal situation. Speaking of vampire battles, as cool as they were in the film, they're seriously played up from how they were in the book. Abraham's attacks on vampires tended to be over before they began, as he almost always made sure to catch them by surprise and kill them before they knew what was happening. On the occasions that this didn't go according to plan, it usually resulted in him or one of his friends getting pretty badly hurt, as a human really was no match for a vampire one-on-one. The big build-up to Lincoln's showdown with Jack Bart's as film only. Bart was actually Lincoln's first ever vampire kill, and he did it as a mere child, caught the guy off guard and gave him a damn good staking. In the book, Henry is even older than he was in the film, having been one of the first European colonists to ever step foot in America. The entire colony was wiped out by a hungry vampire who then staged it to look like a Native American attack before turning Henry on a whim in case he got lonely later. In the film, Henry ended up as the only good vampire amongst a sea of evil ones. However, in the book, he was actually one of many like-minded vampires that felt that attempting to coexist with humans, or at least controlling them from the shadows, was a better plan than openly trying to take over. Sort of a left-wing undead secret society. There were vampires helping to fight on the side of the Union as well as the Confederates in the book, and Lincoln even had 3 highly effective vampire bodyguards for a while. Joshua Speed is the only one of Lincoln's multiple vampire hunting friends from the book who made made it into the film, and ironically, he was one of the few that actually outlived him originally. The weird force that stopped vampires from trying to kill each other wasn't in the book, which made the question of why Henry needed Lincoln in the first place more mysterious, but also avoided the crushing inconsistency of the end of the film, which clearly shows two vampires trying to kill each other. Adam and his sister aren't in the book at all. There isn't really any one vampire who serves as the main villain of the story, it's more their existence in general and their increasingly aggressive infestation of America that's the problem. The entire wonderfully ridiculous train fight at the end was created just for the film. You can pretty much disregard everything the film does after the start of the Battle of Gettysburg. Another film-only addition is the introduction of the harmful effects of silver on vampires. You know, I actually wrote an essay on this sort of thing once, comparing vampires in films to natural selection and evolution. Over the years, writers have tried out multiple new things in vampire movies, and the interesting ones have got picked up by other movies and become vampire canon, while the others die out quite quickly because they're stupid. But I digress, I do apologise. The single biggest change to the fundamental nature of the story is that in the film, Lincoln pursues a political career, sought to liberate the slaves, and fought the Civil War against the wishes of Henry, who believed that the status quo of letting the vampires sate their hunger on unlucky black people was the only way to keep them in check. Whereas in the book, pretty much all of that stuff was part of the Union vampires' master plan to defeat their enemies. Henry and his chums arranged for Lincoln to be elected, and they encouraged him to take a harder line with the separatists. The only thing that was mainly his idea was signing the Emancipation Proclamation, and even that was just an attempt to cut off the vampires' food supply, not primarily because of his belief in the equality of man. In the book, Lincoln is reduced to the status of pawn in the game of vampires. He was fully aware of this and was a willing pawn, but still, you know? There's a hell of a lot of stuff in the book that got passed over for the film. As I mentioned, there's a surprising amount of story devoid of vampires, like Lincoln's time as a Mississippi boatmaker, his failed attempts to become an entrepreneur, and his cases as a lawyer. There's also countless vampire hunts that are left out, and one occasion where he almost kills a human through mistaken identity. There were also some really good moments, like a chance encounter with Edgar Allan Poe where they both mistake each other for vampires, and Lincoln's failed attempt to personally assassinate Jefferson Davis. In the book, Lincoln also invented the chemical flare, which he called martyrs. They proved to be very effective at temporarily stunning vampires because of their hypersensitivity to light. The film ended Lincoln's story as he set off for the theatre and his appointment with a bullet, skipping forward a century or so to a guy who's been disappointingly confirmed to not be Barack Obama meeting Henry. The book goes on to describe his assassination in vivid detail from both his perspective and from the perspective of a rather pissed off vampire by the name of John Wilkes Booth. The story keeps on going after this, covering Booth getting finally tracked down and cornered in a burning building, and eventually getting finished off by Henry himself, avenging his fallen friend. Believe it or not, the book actually still keeps on going after that, giving The Lord of the Rings a run for its money on endings and leading us to the most amusing thing that they left out. Henry decides that Lincoln is just too interesting a person to stay dead, so brings him back to life as a vampire, and they spend the next 100 years fighting bad guys together. Yep, according to the book, Abraham Lincoln is still out there somewhere combating the forces of darkness on our behalf. Hail to the motherfucking chief, yo. The Dom's final thoughts. I'd actually have to say that as goofy as the film was in places, it's the book that's ultimately more disrespectful to the memory of real-life Abraham Lincoln. It ends up making out that all of his greatest life accomplishments were either not his idea, not his doing, or a byproduct of a much larger, more important event. In the book, the Great Emancipator just wasn't all that great, and that just doesn't seem right to me. I'd much rather the way they went in the film, where his place in history was assured by the things he did despite of his war with the vampires, not because of it. If you like a bit of good-natured, mindless action horror, watch the film. If you like a nice blend of history and fiction, read the book, and it shouldn't be too frustrating to do both if you feel so inclined. Fare thee well, beautiful watchers.